Welcome back in, everybody, to Fantasy Fest. It's time to talk about the players you don't want, and to help us do it are two analysts that I do want here to talk about. Andrew Erickson is here, our good pal from Fantasy Pros and Betting Pros. And speaking of betting, one of the best there is on the wagering network, SportsGrid TV, where you can also find me on Sundays, Kasey Hudson. Kasey, I know you recently moved. Let me just tell you, the apartment, you're like me. It looks like you're an unpacker. You look settled in. You look ready to go.
I am sorted. My parents were not going to allow me to be here and have it be a mess because they knew I hit the ground running. Had to be at SportsGrid for 4 hours, back-to-back days. So this is Mama's doing.
And well, good on Mama. And unfortunately, you had to spend about 3 of those hours with me, but that's terrible fate. Andrew Erickson, good to see you, my friend. We're going to go through some of the potential busts in fantasy football for 2024. And of course, that is the thing, Andrew, right? Every year we come in and we look at the board, and you could target certain players in certain situations that you just have concerns about. Do you feel like you're seeing more of those guys in 2024 than usual, or do you think the board looks pretty good overall when you take a look at it in terms of those landmines you want to avoid?
I think that the market's gotten much better. You know, when we have a lot of great analysts, especially ones in-house and the ones that we have on the show today, we're putting people in the right position to avoid these potential landmines. So I think that the market has wisened up. We've seen the RB dead zone move significantly. We are drafting running backs, especially ones that don't check off all the boxes, much later than we have in past years. So I think that we are getting better. We are getting more educated, and I love to see it.
All right, let's talk about the first player on the list here. And Kasey, you're coming out of the gates pretty hot here. You're talking about Breece Hall potentially being a bust at his ADP. Now, we love the player, and we've heard a lot of positive buzz about Breece Hall. Why would Breece Hall potentially be a guy that could hurt you? Is it just that you want to take those wide receivers early, or do you have bigger concerns potentially about the workload in the Jets offense, what it looks like with or even without Aaron Rodgers again?
It's the workload for me because you've got Aaron Rodgers coming in. He's got a lot of chatter around what he will or will not do. His legendary play and quarterbacking at this time of his life is being questioned. And when you see Aaron Rodgers with a point to prove, you see him air out the ball a lot more. He's got Garrett Wilson, who's going to want another 1,000-yard season. He's got Allen Lazard. Yeah, people are saying that they're not hitting their chemistry quite yet in camp, but this is a guy that he targeted 6 to 7 times in a game when he was back with the Packers. You got Xavier Gibson, who probably has a lot more to prove this season also. So the workload in the quarterback carousel is where I kind of said, I don't know if Hall is going to have as much of a production load, not to mention is it 2 of the games where he probably racked up a lot of those points and those carries were versus New England, which, yeah, they still are a dumpster fire, but 37 carries in a game. And then Denver, another team probably still a dumpster fire, but 22 plus carries. And so their scheduling also and the run stop defenses they're going to go against. And then Aaron Rodgers with a chip on his shoulder. I think that the production is going to take a little bit of a back seat.
She went right for the heart there with 2 New England fans just throwing the Pats under the bus.
Oh, I'm sorry, gentlemen.
It's all right. It's true. I mean, Andrew and I both know. Don't cry any tears for us. But, you know, when it does come to Breece Hall and, you know, the workload and what we saw last year, you know, he had 223 attempts last year, Andrew, 95 targets in that offense. It's really tough to gauge what Breece Hall would be in 2024 with Aaron Rodgers because we haven't seen it yet. So Kasey brings up an interesting point here, which is workload. Maybe Aaron Rodgers out to prove something. Maybe he doesn't want to turn and hand the ball over that much. And if you do, dare I say, get a healthy season out of Mike Williams, maybe all of a sudden this Tyler Conklin, Mike Williams, and of course Garrett Wilson passing attack, maybe it looks a little bit different there. What's your take on Breece Hall this year? Do you find yourself drafting Breece, or are you somebody that tends to pivot to the wide receivers early, Andrew, in some of the recent drafts you've been doing?
So Breece Hall is my number 1 ranked player. So I
counterpoint and point.
Kasey,
I love
again,
this.
Not only are you hating on the Patriots, but you're killing my rankings as well. But I do understand, you know, where you're coming from though. But at the same time, I guess the thing for me is, yes, Rodgers wants to put up numbers, and what we saw him in Green Bay, you know, who was one of his best catchers not named Devontae Adams? It was Aaron Jones. It was a running back. Joe said himself, Breece Hall had 95 targets last year. That was almost as many as Brandon Ayuk had. And we still don't even know what team Ayuk's going to play for. So for me, I look at all those other names, Mike Williams, Gibson, Lazard. I think Breece Hall could be the number 2 receiver on this team behind Garrett Wilson, just like last year. So that's why I'm a little bit higher on Breece Hall. The fact that the offensive line has improved a lot, and the fact that you also have an improve, or he's not coming off the torn ACL. Like last year, he was coming off a major knee injury, and now he's another year removed from that. So for those reasons, I am drafting Breece Hall a lot, and that's why I was my number one ranked player. I like drafting young running backs. McCaffrey's getting up there in age. He's already injured right now, calf strain. So I like Breece Hall the most.
There you go. Let's go to one of your players here, Andrew. And the first one is finally a quarterback. We get to talk about another quarterback here. We haven't talked to a QB in a while, and it's Dak Prescott, a guy that last year, Andrew, certainly I think you could argue had a fantastic season that might have even won some people some leagues, especially if you somehow fell into a stack with CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott towards the end. That was a pretty good combination. Now, this year, you have a little less love for Dak Prescott, and I'm curious to see why that might be as you enter in 2024, because if you look at 2023, he did finish as QB3 and threw for 4,500 yards, 36 touchdowns, just 9 interceptions. Now, look, I know 2 years ago in 2022, he did have the 23 touchdowns, but 15 picks. But in 2021, it was much more similar to 2023. 37 TDs, just 10 interceptions. He's been a guy that hasn't turned over the football all that much. 2022 be the exception. So, Andrew, why are we going backwards potentially with Dak Prescott this year?
Well, you kind of laid it out, right? 2021, good. 2022, bad.
Oh, is that what we're doing?
2023, good. 2024. I mean, where's it? Who is he throwing the ball to? Lamb is not there. Are we really feeling confident that, okay, I got Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, we're hoping and praying for a year 3 breakup from a guy that's barely been on the field the last 2 years? Jake Ferguson, okay, maybe it'll work. I just think last year was the year to buy the dip on Dak, right? And it worked out. Mm-hmm. But this is not the year. What are the vibes around Dallas right now? They're just not good vibes. And overall, when I'm looking at quarterbacks, right, I always want to play the value game a little bit more when it comes to the quarterback. I want to get an elite fantasy quarterback at the best price. And what am I looking at with Dak this year that says that he's going to be an elite fantasy producer if he's not doing it as a pocket passer? When you look at the players that bust at the highest rate at quarterback, it's usually the guys that throw the highest amount of touchdowns the year before and don't offer a lot of rushing value. That's Dak Prescott to a T. You look at the range he's going is QB8, QB9. The QB8 to QB13 range over the last 2 years has absolutely bombed in terms of when you guys that you drafted in that area. So systematically, he just checks off all the boxes of, hey, build a quarterback bust in a lab, pops out Dak Prescott. That's who it looks like this year. So for me, again, overvaluing non-elite. Why would I draft Dak Prescott when I could draft Jordan Love? Same range. He's got 4 number one wide receivers. If one of those guys goes down, you're not going to see Jordan Love any of that production fall off. What if Lamb doesn't show up? What if Lamb hurts his hamstring? Mm-hmm. How confident are you then going in with Dak as your QB1? Because where you draft him, you're probably not going to draft another quarterback. You shouldn't have to based on the draft capital. So for me, there are so many better options I'd rather have. And Dak, if that pocket passing efficiency doesn't carry over, again, like McCarthy, someone I don't want to trust year over year, then I think you're going to get burned by Prescott.
It's an interesting point, too, you make about Love. Like, Love is a quarterback that I tend to target late in those drafts. Love also showed you, without Christian Watson last year, how good he could be. Imagine with Christian Watson, there could even be more upside potentially for Love, which is a scary thing for the rest of the league, that's for sure. Let's stick with Dallas for a second, because, Kasey, one of the guys that you're also circling is somebody who could be a potential bust is another Dallas Cowboy tight end, Jake Ferguson. So let's talk about Ferguson, because he was kind of one of those pleasant surprises at tight end in a year that had a lot of really nice surprises at the position in fantasy. People were terrified about tight end. Turned out to be not so bad as things typically do, which means probably this year will be the inverse, right? We love tight end, and now it's going to all go to pot. But let's talk about Ferguson. Why should people be potentially concerned about him not living up to his potential in 24?
I'll preference this by saying I still have love for the tight ends, but yeah, this guy should likely hit a bit of a decline. And I think Andrew kind of set it up perfectly, depending on what takes place with Dak Prescott. And another trend or pattern that comes over the years is when there's question marks at the offensive line, there's question marks at the distribution of the ball. That's where Ferguson comes in for me. They might need his hand in the dirt a little bit more this upcoming season to help things out. You have Ezekiel Elliott who's going to want to get back up there in the yardage. And not to mention is that the question marks at wide receiver, their ground game is going to have to be a little bit more reliable and a lot more consistent. Brock Hoffman under center. What is that going to look like in the upcoming season? Ferguson's a physical guy, even though he's really done well with his routes and people were surprised by this. It's his physicality and his blocking abilities that kind of got him up the rankings at University of Wisconsin. So if you haven't realized how much I nerd out about tight ends, I know, or at least I want to say that I know when a tight end is going to need to be more hand in the dirt versus, going out for those routes and those passes. And again, another guy with something to prove. Dak Prescott has a lot on the line right now while he's trying to figure out money. And if it's even worth staying in Dallas, I think at this point it's time for him to put his sights elsewhere. But all of that conundrum behind an offensive line that has question marks and a wide receiving core that God knows what's going to happen, Ferguson's got to help out. So that's why I see his yardage kind of coming back a little bit, his red zone play coming kind of back a little bit because he's got to help out.
Andrew, let's bounce back to you with a running back who had another league-winning season last year. We were able to get not one, but two players from the same team, the Rams, that actually gave us league winners, Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua. Now, that stuff doesn't happen very often. Now, Kyren Williams has had a history of some foot issues, and now he's having more foot issues. But it seems like things are going in the right direction here, and everyone keeps telling us we shouldn't be worried. It seems like you are, because you've put him on the RB bust list potentially. He's currently being drafted as the RB7 or RB8 off the board, and you are not buying at that price. Let's talk about why.
No, because I'm not drafting last year's fantasy football winning team. Like, that's what I'm not. I'm trying to draft this year's fantasy football winning team. So a lot of the guys on this list are players that, in my opinion, kind of had the perfect storm. Last year was Dak Prescott, a quarterback, kind of the perfect storm. Kyren Williams, it could have not worked out better for him. Cam Akers got cut. Kyren Williams took over the role and absorbed nearly every single touch in the Rams backfield because they didn't want to give the ball to anybody else. And when he got hurt last year, well, they were like, we still don't have anybody else to give the ball to. So here you go, Kyren. You're going to be back in the RB1 bell cow role that we've seen work for so many different running backs over the years, whether it was been Todd Gurley, Cam Akers at one point, Darrell Henderson. But we've been down this road before. Sean McVay, churn and burn, baby. That's what he does with these running backs. The minute that he finds somebody else better, he moves on and he goes to somebody else. And that's what I'm concerned about with the addition of Blake Corum, because Blake Corum is a baller. He is so good. He's not even playing in the preseason because he's already established himself as a valuable piece of this offense. Sean McVay, notorious for never playing anyone that he views valuable or as a starter in the preseason games. Blake Corum has not been in any preseason action so far. So the way I look at it with Kyren is he's been banged up first 2 years in the NFL. So I think for me, you're looking at some of the injuries on the offensive line for the Rams already. I just think that, again, I look at busts from a systematic approach. I look for who checks off the box of a running back that has red flags that look like busts when you look back on the year. And that's Kyren Williams for me. When the first thing about a running back talks about, well, his role in the offense is X, and you're not talking about the play, you're talking about how he's used as a piece. Well, that's the concern, because I think Blake Corum can do everything that Kyren Williams can do. And he cost an 11th round pick. So yes, maybe it's bumpy for the first month of the year. Maybe I'm not looking great. Well, then you sell high on Kyren Williams, and then talk to me in October when Blake Corum has a bigger role. So for me, I'm out on Kyren Williams, very much in on Blake Corum.
Casey, what are your thoughts on Kyren Williams? Because this is a system that you want to be a part of. Sean McVay and fantasy has been very good to us for the most part over the years and pretty clear. But the one thing that's always been a little muddy after the Todd Gurley years has been the running back position. Is Blake Corum and the Kyren Williams, kind of coming out of nowhere last year combination enough for you to stay away from Kyren in 2024?
Yeah, that on top of the fact that I don't think that the running back position has always been the most flattering or sexiest position for the Rams team. I mean, McVay loves a chance when he has a quarterback that he trusts to air out the ball. You've got Stafford coming back, who should be on the healthier side. We'll see what gauges over the next couple of weeks here, but and then especially the health of Cooper Kupp. So you've got too many pieces here where the Rams are going to want to get back to their foundational style, which is letting that ball rip and fly. And then some of the competition they're going to have versus some secondaries this year, they're not going to have to run the ball as much. So I think that between the incoming guy and then getting back to their ways with health being on their side, I wouldn't jump in on the Kyren Williams thing either. I'm with Andrew on this one.
All right, before we get to the next player on the list for Casey in terms of bust potential, I want to remind everybody we're doing giveaways all season long, and we've got a great one for you right now. If you want a chance to win a signed Joe Burrow helmet for free, you don't have to do a damn thing. Well, maybe one or two things. From pristineauction.com, too. That's where this is coming from. So it's verified. Go to fantasypros.com/contest and complete the form and either download the Fantasy Pros Draft Wizard app, leave a review for the podcast, or follow us on X, Instagram, or TikTok at Fantasy Pros. The more of these actions you complete, the more entries you receive. It's like a quest from Lord of the Rings. And at the end, instead of a ring, you know what you get? A Joe Burrow autographed helmet. And we'll be monitoring and announcing the winner right here on the channel. So be sure to subscribe and turn on those notifications to the YouTube channel of Fantasy Pros so you can be alerted when new episodes are up, and you can claim your prize. That Joe Burrow helmet can be yours, signed by Joe Burrow himself, not Joe Pisapia. They decided that would be a little bit more valuable to have Joe Burrow sign it instead. Again, fantasypros.com/contest. Go throw your hat in the ring for this helmet. All right, Len, that's a good one too. I like the white the Bengals helmet. That is the sexy helmet at the end of the day. Love the all white. Can't get enough of it. All right, let's get to your next pick here, Kasey. Isiah Pacheco is the guy on your list. And this is an interesting one because this is a player in the fantasy football community. I've seen a lot of analysts who love him this year and a lot of analysts that are fading him this year. If Patrick Mahomes comes back into the 5,000-yard passing realm, which is something the previous 2 seasons before last year's debacle is true, what does that mean for Isiah Pacheco's potential in 2024? Why would it take a hit?
Well, we already know that I have hard feelings when it comes to the Chiefs, but putting my feelings aside, you've got Xavier Worthy coming into the mix here. And the first thing that stood out with me in terms of Patrick Mahomes, the backyard football style the Chiefs can play, and his ability to make plays happen, it's going to be the fact that Xavier Worthy is coming in at 5'11", 172, and having a solid camp. And you're seeing a lot of spark out of Patrick Mahomes wanting to make connections with this guy. Well, that reminds me of Tyreek Hill, 5'10", 180 to 90 poundish. He's going to kind of get that fun spark in a receiver back. Not to mention is that Xavier Worthy is faster. Coming out of his 40 time was like 4.21, where he was about 5 to 7 seconds less than Tyreek Hill. So that was the first thing that I saw. The next thing that I saw is that the Chiefs are going to be going up against a few more teams that have a better run stop defense. So it's going to be a little bit more problematic for Pacheco to make things happen. And then to your argument between us on SportsGrid the other day, if Travis Kelce is healthy and his ankles feel good and he's all buttered up this season, then it's going to be a bigger season for him too. So you just got a lot more supporting roles, supporting characters coming into the mix for this Chiefs offense. And Pacheco was heavily relied on because there was a lot of spotty moments for the Chiefs last year. So while he can still be helpful, I just think that between some of these matchups, I mean, Falcons added to their defense. It's not going to be an easy feat for the Chiefs when it comes to the run game. And then you've got these other targets in the wide receiver room. You've got guys who still have to fight for their job. And you've got Patrick Mahomes who changes his mind in the blink of an eye. And with a Travis Kelce that's healthy, that's where the connection goes to. So I just think the production load's going to change.
You know, I struggle with Pacheco because I really like the player. I love the individual. He's a local kid here, not far from me in New Jersey. But you have the upside of Devon Achane right after him, and then the steadiness of Rachaad White after him as well. And I look at those two picks and I just kind of say, do I really want to go for running back in such a typically pass-heavy offense? And last year was a bit of an anomaly for Patrick Mahomes because of so many failures, epic failures at that, from some of those guys in the wide receiver core. Back to you, Andrew Erickson. Let's talk about another wide receiver on your list, and his name is Nico Collins. Now, this is a guy I'm drafting everywhere. So we're going to fight about this one, I feel like, because I think he's the clear number one. Tank Dell is fun. Stephon Diggs is older and already a problem child, it seems like. I got no issue with Nico Collins at wide receiver 14, especially considering last year he finished as a wide receiver 1. So why am I wrong and you're right? I think that's the end of the day. That's the conversation to have.
I think that you're potentially overconfident of looking at him as the number one wide receiver on this team. He played.
Who is?
I don't know exactly. I'm not exactly sure, but that's why there's bust potential here with Nico Collins, because I can't confidently say who's going to be the number one leader in targets, who's going to lead the team in touchdowns. I don't know. I don't know who it's going to be. And when I look at the prices of Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, they cost so much less. I'm taking on less risk. If Nico Collins has to be the number one to pay off, those other guys don't have to be the number ones to pay off where they're going in drafts. So looking at last year, Nico Collins, a lot of his production was boosted when there was nobody else to throw the ball to. Him and Tank Dell put up nearly identical production where they were both healthy and on the field. Tank Dell outgained him in yards over the last 4 games that they played together. Nico Collins had a year 3 breakout. Tank Dell had a rookie breakout, his first year in the NFL. It took us 3 years to get here with Nico Collins. Yes, the quarterback play. I understand that. But it still matters. that he was able to do so much of his production with all those other guys, not necessarily part of the picture here. So for me, that's my concern, where you draft him in round 2, you expect him to be the number 1. What if week 1 comes along and then he doesn't lead the team in targets? Now, they are playing the Colts week 1, so we probably will have a big week 1. So maybe after week 2, maybe after week 1.
That's when Joey P does the victory lap on Andrew Erickson.
Week 1, I will be coming on the show with a clown mask, most likely. But after week 1, I'm thinking that this isn't going to necessarily be a targeted concentration around Nico Collins. And one of the things I looked at last year, again, looking at wide receiver busts, players that perform well above expectation in terms of expected fantasy points per game. Collins was wide receiver 21 expected fantasy points per game, and only Deebo Samuel had more fantasy points expected than Nico Collins did last year. So I think he played well above what he was expected based on his role, and given that now he's fending off targets between 2 guys I'm really excited about with Diggs and Tank Dell in this offense, those are the reasons I'm just pushing the brakes. I understand the upside case with Nico Collins, but with every upside case, there is also a downside case that, most people just don't like to talk about. It's not good radio. We want to talk about good things about players and not necessarily bad things.
Well, I mean, this is more than just radio. This is the Fantasy Pros live stream. Hello, this is a big deal here. I'm going to go put my faith in the efficiency of Nico Collins that you're trashing him for a little bit. 80 receptions on 109 targets, 8 touchdowns, 1,297 yards. Finishes wide receiver 9 last year, a top 10 guy, and you're going to give him to be a 14. Look, even if it does get a little muddy sometimes with the Texans, I still think more often than not, Nico's the guy that I want. And I want to fight about this next guy with you too, because this might be my favorite guy. At the turn I always take, Marvin Harrison Jr. I keep coming back to the same thing of, if you look at the last few years, you've seen the league make a huge pivot. Number 4 all-time rookie receivers, Justin Jefferson in 2020, 1,400 yards. The year after that, Jamar Chase, 1,455 just in 2021. And then last year, 2023, the all-time record holder, Puka Nacua at 1,486. It's a wide receiver world, and the rookies are dominating it. And Marvin Harrison has 0 competition, and you're telling me not to draft him? Why, Andrew? Why?
Because none of those guys that you just talked about were fringe first-round picks that you had to draft. Part of the allure and why we want to draft rookie receivers doesn't have to do with their end-of-season production. It has to do with where you drafted them. It matters the fact that all those rookies were so much cheaper than Marvin Harrison. That's point of buying into rookies. That's why we like them, because they're discounted. But for some reason, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not discounted at all whatsoever. Even in the most homiest home leagues, he's still going in the fringe first round. So again, going back to wide receiver busts, systematically, what are they? Projections. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a projection, and you may be right. But why do I want to put all of my faith into a projection with my first round pick, second round pick, when I could draft proven production at other positions or at the wide receiver position? Or if I have to have some part of Marvin Harrison, why don't I just draft Kyler Murray in like round 9 as my quarterback? And then I can benefit from all the Marvin Harrison that you love to talk about, but then I take on none of the risk. I get 0 risk if maybe he's a better real life receiver for his rookie year than a fantasy wide receiver, because I'm not denying the talent of Marvin Harrison, but I just think that it's a bad value play, honestly. Like, I just think he's a bad value where you have to draft him. And it kind of sucks, honestly, that we're projecting him so highly. And yeah, so for those reasons,
I think we're projecting him so highly because we've seen what happens with these slam dunk, big time wide receivers when they come in the league. Now, Puka was not that guy, but Jefferson and Chase were. And that has been obviously where the league is trending. So, Casey, you be the tiebreaker here. Marvin Harrison Jr. Am I too much in love with the situation here with this terrible defense where they're going to be playing from behind a million times? And I don't see anybody besides Trey McBride competing with him for targets. And I think 1,400 yards is in his range of outcomes. What do you think about Harrison? Is he a bust or is he a draft despite the high ADP for you?
I'm taking him as a draft only because A, the lack of targets that they have, but B, the way that Murray can be injury prone sometimes. Say that somebody else has to get a tap on the shoulder here. You're going to go to your 1 of 1 or 1 of 2-ish targets. And then rallying from behind, like you said, it tends to be the DNA of the Cardinals right now. Like, I just think that this guy's going to end up getting hit with a lot of targets regardless. He's either going to be the one guy to go to help outside of McBride, or he's going to be the one guy that they just continue to figure things out with along the way. So I think he's in a perfect position with not much competition to get those reps in.
All right, let's go to another big-time wide receiver. I just mentioned Justin Jefferson. Now, all of a sudden, his 2024 looks a little bit different now that the savior JJ McCarthy is not going to be around for this season. Sam Darnold stuck all year with Justin Jefferson. Now, I've seen him go already. Somebody messaged me. They said they got him at the turn yesterday at 12. So his value is falling. Here, the consensus ADP is wide receiver 3, wide receiver 5, somewhere in that range. That is not what's happening in the draft streets right now. So, Kasey, as a top 5 pick, is he a bust? And is a pick at 12 at the turn, is he a value at this stage?
I think more valuable probably at the 12, just because it's not like he's not going to be productive. He's that guy. I think you mentioned earlier, or somebody mentioned earlier here on the show, how the inconsistent production between Addison, they're still going to get him rotated in. We've seen what Justin Jefferson can do down the stretch, but it's the Sam Darnold effect here for me. You're coming behind a shaky O-line for the Vikings now. They've got a lot of rebuild going on within their organization, and a guy coming in barely hitting a 60% completion rate. And so while we've seen some flattering moments out of Darnold, maybe back when he was with the Jets for a hot second, then sure, but I don't think we're going to get that quarterback, and I think it's going to end up screwing with Justin Jefferson. And plus, think about where he got a lot of his massive yardage from. Those deep balls that he was able to connect on. And that's not something that I see him and Sam Darnold being able to do consistently. So I think the yardage is going to drop off. I think that he's going to have to try to look around a little bit. I think that they also want to get Addison more involved also. So I just don't think that this season is set up for the success of Jefferson as a top 5 receiver. I think there is a little bit more value at 12 just because, again, he is going to be a key part here. It just depends on what takes place with his quarterback.
Erickson, I want to get your take here because the stock is falling fast. Again, you get Justin Jefferson at 12. I'm still going to take him at 12 every single time. I'm just going to do it. Kasey makes a lot of good points for that too. But as wide receiver 3 or the 5th overall player, which is kind of that conversation where he was being drafted just a few weeks ago, what's your opinion of Jefferson right now? Is he a guy that you've got to get the discount, or are you a guy that who's taking Justin Jefferson regardless of where he is available for you?
No, I think you got to get the discount. I think that he is discounted, rightfully so, because of the quarterback concerns. I don't really I'm not like actively fading Justin Jefferson. Like I don't go out on a draft and be like, I'm not taking this guy, but I usually find myself not really ending up with him because I've talked about Breece Hall. So he sometimes goes in the same area as Jefferson. I like Chase more than Justin Jefferson. So naturally I haven't found myself drafting a lot of Jefferson. But if I was picking, at the turn, which I usually don't like picking, if Justin Jefferson was there, that's who I would be definitely taking. I wouldn't even think twice about it compared to some of these other second round wide receivers who sometimes go in round 1, depending on how you feel about a player like Jefferson. But for me, look, the JJ McCarthy injury maybe hurts an upside case with Jefferson because maybe he could have come in, had a Stroud type season, not very likely, but there was always that chance that McCarthy could offer something Darnold didn't. But the thing for me is Jefferson knows who his quarterback is the rest of the way. 17-game season is going to be Sam Darnold. Like there's no, we got to switch reps. Who's taking reps with the ones? It's Jefferson. It's Darnold. Like that's his ride or die. So I think that works from a standpoint of Darnold is playing for a contract year here. So if Darnold really wants to show other teams that he can deliver and be a quarterback at the NFL level, he knows I need to target Justin Jefferson 200 times because that's my best chance of putting up the best numbers and the best stat line at the end of the year so I can get a job in the NFL as a starter a la Geno Smith, a la Baker Mayfield. We've seen this with a bunch of retread quarterbacks. So I think Jefferson's going to be his guy. And it may be ugly at sometimes, but 20 targets in a game, it'll get you something.
It may be ugly lots of times. It is Sam Darnold, and perhaps come October, he'll start seeing those ghosts again. It is Halloween season. Great stuff here from both of you. Some big names here on the potential bust list. I want to thank Kasey Hudson for joining us here again. Check out our amazing work on SportsGrid and give her a follow too, because she covers everything. Oh my God, she does Wimbledon we did together. She's doing NFL. She's doing hockey. She's one of the best NHL folks out there too. She does it all. Thanks so much for giving us some time today.